If Trump really wants to stop illegal immigration, why aren't employers being arrested? This is a great point, and I'll just speak to it quickly. When they were crafting legislation regarding immigration, I know something about this because my father was instrumental, I should say, in instituting a lot of the reforms that were associated with immigration. This is back in the 80s, okay? And the problem with immigration and questions about immigration have always been around. And back then, they were looking at different ways to curb illegal immigration and the flow of illegal immigrants. Undocumented workers, however you want to frame it. And the only way to really do it, at that time, it was all economic incentive. There are many different facets to illegal immigration and immigration flow, right? There are those seeking asylum. That's a big part now of the American history of immigrants coming to this country. But there's also a huge flow, and particularly this is back in the 80s, which this pertains to her question, about economics. Many people coming here because there were economic opportunities, right? We needed their work. We needed them in everything from slaughterhouses to agricultural fields in California and beyond to kitchens. And those economic opportunities existed in such a big way that it brought a whole flow of people who ended up in this country and they're undocumented. So how to craft legislation that would cut down on that crew? Right now, we bust the people who come over the border. But what if you penalized the employers? Those are that legislation and those legal precepts that were put in place are called employer sanctions. If you sanction an employer for hiring someone who's in the country undocumented, you begin to cut down on the number of undocumented workers who are hired. And so, as I mentioned, they were crafting a constitutional provision, an amendment that would actually provide for legislation that would provide for employer sanctions to get rid of the incentive that employers had to hire all of these people who are in the country illegally. Now, as you might imagine, being and this is the quiet part that we can say out loud, being a big part of the economy in all of those places that I mentioned, actually employers don't want you to help get rid of those people. They want those people. It's a completely one-sided relationship. Employers have all the leverage over these people who are in the country illegally because if they give them any static at all, they can threaten to fire them at minimum and call the cops on them, would be, dropping the hammer on them. So the employers, they don't want to be sanctioned, and the employer pushback was huge. And so that employer sanction part that you were talking about in your question, we say, why don't they just arrest or penalize in some way the employers of all these people? It's because the setup, it was suggested, would disfavor so many employers who need this workforce that it's not politically viable to do it. And as a result, that was dropped from the legislation. And this is a very big deal in all of this, in this 3-day mass protest against the presence of ICE and then the presence of the National Guard. One of the things that happened was the injury and then the arrest of David Huerta. David Huerta is a union leader, very high-profile union leader. And in the community that is most affected by this, the service workers look to David Huerta and to their union in ways that maybe union heads may not quite get that relationship elsewhere. Here's what I mean. In California, where we are, the union that David Huerta is representing and the unions themselves have a much different consistency than you'll find in other parts of America. And to put a fine point on it, there are many Latinos who are in that union in numbers that far exceed the number of Latinos in unions elsewhere in the United States. And so when you injure, he had to be hospitalized and treated, and then additionally detain David Huerta, it is going to resonate and rumble and ripple through that community that is affected by these ICE raids in ways that it wouldn't in other parts of the world. Again, this is one more component in everything that was going on with the ICE raids and the attendant reaction and pushback in Los Angeles. And I didn't want to talk about everything going on without mentioning that. It's a very big deal that Huerta was arrested. And, you know, they arrest 40 people, including Huerta, for impeding a federal officer while protesting. And that brought a lot of union members out to stand against these ICE raids. So this is one of the things that fanned the flames. And before anything was going on in LA, Stephen Miller posted a clip of protesters surrounding the federal detention center in LA and wrote that these protesters constituted, quote, an insurrection against the laws and sovereignty of the United States. So he's eager, it would seem, to invoke the Insurrection Act that allows Trump to pull the National Guard in, pull the Marines in, etc. Again, the fact that the feds are involved and the federal building is involved, and that you've got protesters who are facing off against the feds in some ways, that muddies the water legally in terms of the court case that Gavin Newsom is going to pursue against Washington and the federal government in the form of Donald Trump for the use of the National Guard, essentially seizing control of the National Guard from the governor of California and employing the National Guard in peacekeeping right now in Los Angeles. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.